Hi, I'm Governor Rod Blagojevich, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug. A mensch.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug.
Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us this week. My guest today is Henry Roth Ph.D. Dr. Roth is a psychologist and a specialist in behavior disorders and emotionally disturbed children. And Dr. Roth is the author of Climbing Jacob's Ladder, a guide to teaching and counseling Orthodox students in the Jewish community. And Dr. Roth, welcome to the show, and glad you could be with us. Dr. Roth is the director of the Jewish Children's Bureau Therapeutic Day Schools, which include secular schools and Jewish day schools, which cater to the Orthodox community in the Chicago area. And Dr. Roth has seen it all. And tell me, first of all, what made you decide, I presume this is your first book, right?
Right.
What made you decide that your first book, obviously you've written a lot of papers and a lot of drafts about different subjects in the field because you're a professor, you teach in the university, and you also run the school, and you obviously have seen so much in the field of behavior disorders, emotionally disturbed, which you specialize in. What made you decide to write about Orthodox students and treating them?
Well, I have the unique opportunity to work at the Jewish Children's Bureau Therapeutic Day School, and we opened up a separate division for the Orthodox students who might have problematic behavior at school. So over the last 6 or 7 years that I've had the opportunity to work in that capacity, it's been a real challenge, and I felt this kind of work, this kind of book would give me the opportunity to describe what we've learned in working with these students who have problematic behavior at school, but who also have a very rich religious background that complicates a number of issues that they might have at school. So I thought the book would offer something particularly unique.
Unique in the way of books on the market? Is there any other book or author out there who has put something together about Orthodox students who have emotional and behavior issues?
Well, there are a number of books out on the market, but I think at the Jewish Children's Bureau School we have the unique opportunity. There are not many Orthodox programs for students who have behavioral issues at school. So we have one of the few programs out there, and this gives us a database from which to show some of the things that we've been able to accomplish there.
Now, on our show before, we've had the director of the whole agency, Jewish Children's Bureau, Robert Bloom, and this is just one section of the agency. Were you teaching or directing other schools in the field of therapeutic day schools before you came to JCB?
Well, I was at Duke University. They had a division for students that had behavioral and emotional problems, and I was the principal of that school. It was called the Child Psychiatry Day School at Duke University. So I did that from 1975 to 1989.
It's from 1975. That's a long time to stay in one place also. And you've been at JCB now for 13 years or so, right?
From 1989 to the present.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a long time also to be in one place. So you must be very dedicated. This must be something that you're very passionate about. Am I right?
I enjoy it a lot. I enjoyed the program that we have for the Orthodox students. That's been a real pleasure to be a part of, and I enjoy the other students that we have at the school too, that from the secular division.
Let's talk about Rick Roth, and I call you Dr. Henry Roth, and Rick, and I know the story. It's a wonderful story. You're named after someone named Henrik, but they named you Henry and gave you the nickname Rick, right?
Right.
So let's talk about Rick Roth, because I know everybody calls you Rick. How did you get into this? How do you become a psychologist and specialize in this field?
Well, this field is unique in terms of being able to apply some of the psychological principles that you may know in a practical setting. So I always enjoyed that as a challenge to actually take what you're able to get from a psychological setting and apply it in a school setting in a very practical way.
Could you, as someone who works with children in psychology, could you open up an office and see patients and do that kind of psychology also if you wanted to?
Well, sure, if this was something that I was interested in doing, but I find that I can incorporate some of that counseling aspect at the school, and we try to do that at the school too.
Which you certainly do, because you are a man who runs up and down the stairs from class to class all day long because you want to be involved in every child's life, and I don't think that there are too many principals or directors of schools, especially who are psychologists and want to be part of everyone's life and to know 60, 70 kids and their lives and their family lives and their emotional disturbances and behavior problems is certainly a great feat in itself, and I know you do that. Climbing Jacob's Ladder Teaching and Counseling Orthodox Students is about Orthodox students. Did you specifically choose students from the school that you wrote about, or did you generalize when you wrote the book?
I generalized when I wrote the book, so the book condenses what we've learned at the school. They don't represent any individual in particular, but it condenses what we know from what we have seen at the school, and the characters in the book are composite figures.
Tell us a little bit about the book. Jewish children from Orthodox homes are raised in homes with strict Sabbath observance, strict diets on kosher diets, and so on and so forth. So they obviously have a lot of restrictions in their life. And those children who are emotionally disturbed, is it rebellion to religion that you focus in? What is it that the book is really going to tell us when we read it?
Well, the book attempts to highlight the relationship between conflicted religious feelings and a student's problematic behavior at school. So traditionally, it's been the case that educators who work with Orthodox students might overemphasize school and psychological problems and underestimate some of their conflicted religious feelings. And as a result, the relationship between their conflicted religious feelings and their behavioral problems often goes missed or unrecognized. So the purpose of the book is to highlight the importance of the relationship between conflicted religious feelings and their problematic behavior at school. Clearly, in some cases, you're going to find that their problematic behavior at school and their conflicted religious feelings, that the conflicted religious feelings leads to problematic behavior at school. In other cases, it might contribute but not necessarily cause behavioral problems. But in either case, whether it contributes to or causes, it's a factor, and when both factors are present, both factors should be considered. So highlighting the importance of conflicted religious feelings and problematic behavior at school is an important emphasis of the book.
Would you say that the book is geared toward a parent with a child who has these conflicted feelings and act out in this way, or would you say that it's really a book for people who are generally looking into psychological education and looking into education of children with behavioral conflicts in general?
I think it could be for both. I think it could definitely be for both. It could certainly help parents who have students, have children that have behavioral problems and they manifest themselves at school. It could certainly help them with certain techniques that they might be able to use. And also it can help educators who work with these students on a day-to-day basis more effectively plan for their curriculum and for their day-in, day-out activities.
In your school, the children have a social worker in school as well as see you on a daily basis, just in and out of the halls, you checking in with them. Do you feel that the relationship between the director and the social worker have a positive, effect on the child? And the reason I'm asking that is I would think that sometimes you would think there'd be a conflict. I don't want to talk to my social worker. I want to talk to Dr. Roth. He's my principal. Or I don't want to talk to Dr. Roth. He's my principal who's coming to approach me when I have a problem. I want to talk to my social worker. Do you find those conflicts, or do you think they mesh together?
Well, I think it could certainly be a problem like you're suggesting, But I think if the staff is working together and you have ongoing meetings with the staff, I think most of those problems can be avoided. So if the social worker and the principal and the teachers and the teaching assistants, if we're all working together, we can avoid those inevitable conflicts that you're suggesting. And I think that's one point of the book, that when the staff work together, you're more likely to have a successful program for the child. And that means not only the staff working together, but the staff working together with the parents and with members of the community. So harnessing the strengths of the family, of the child, of the community, and of the school into one strong alliance is quite important in achieving the kinds of goals that you would want in a therapeutic day school setting.
Let me take a scenario. Let's take a boy named Isaac, just the name out of the air. Isaac at home is troublesome, and he refuses to wear his yarmulke in the home, and he doesn't go to the synagogue on Saturday when his family goes to the synagogue, and he goes out and he buys food in a non-kosher restaurant. Yet, when he goes to school, he wears his yarmulke. He doesn't eat non-kosher food. He's successful in school because the therapeutic school sets up the right setting for him. What do the parents do? What do the parents do? Because obviously the conflict is tearing them apart at home because they have such a distance between them and their child who's not relating at all to what their lifestyle is like.
Well, what we try to work on at the school, the social workers who work with the parents, is to set up realistic expectations. For example, in the case that you described, you can only do what you can do. If Isaac, in fact, is working well at school, that in itself is positive, and you have to focus on that. And then gradually you develop realistic expectations so that Isaac gradually moves from only doing well at a therapeutic day school setting, and he's going to do well, hopefully, at school, at home as well over time. So you try to set up realistic expectations and follow through with them in a developmental, stepwise manner, and not to move too quickly. And obviously the opposite could be true as well, where Isaac only does well at home and he manifests most of his problems in the school setting. So the school would have to be realistic too, that over time, hopefully Isaac will achieve his goals, but you can't push him too fast.
And for those people who aren't familiar with a therapeutic school, because I think a lot of people aren't familiar, what's the difference between a school for children with disabilities, learning disabilities, and a therapeutic day school? Could you describe what a therapeutic day school is? Because in the Chicago area, there are a number of therapeutic day schools that are available, and obviously in the Jewish Children's Bureau, they have the Yeshiva Day School, which is available for kids in the Orthodox community. What is a therapeutic day school compared to a self-contained classroom in a public school for children with some disabilities?
Well, in order to get into a therapeutic day school, you have to be referred either from Chicago Public School System for our secular program or from one of the yeshiva day schools.
Or in a suburban setting from their public school system wherever they live.
Correct. So some of these students have exhibited behaviors in their mainstream setting that indicate they're not getting along very well, and they need a more structured, supportive environment in which they can flourish.
So why wouldn't they put them just into a self-contained classroom? I know when I was growing up in school, and I went to public school as a young child, there was always that special class where, it was known as the special class, where certain kids were in all day. They didn't switch around and go and switch classes like the other kids did. Why wouldn't they do that?
Well, they still do. What you're trying to do is have a continuum of services from the least drastic alternative to the most drastic alternative. So theoretically, when students are misbehaving in school or have emotional or behavioral difficulties, the first line of attack would be to keep them in that setting and get resource help. If that doesn't work, perhaps giving them learning disability help if they have a learning disability, or resource help if that's what's necessary, and then moving them into a self-contained class within the public school system, and then if that doesn't work, perhaps a therapeutic day school setting. But all the while, the goal is to move them from a least restrictive intervention to a more restrictive intervention only if necessary.
And that's based on the law, isn't it? Isn't there such a law that you have to provide the least restrictive setting where your child can be educated?
Right. So The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires that you take that stepwise manner in providing the students with appropriate services.
So unique to communities, to the Jewish community, to the Chicago area, within the Jewish Children's Bureau Therapeutic Schools, the opening of a yeshiva day school, a Jewish day school, most of these kids never went to public school. How does that work? If somebody has never been in public school, that they could be tuitioned or referred by the public school system into a therapeutic day school?
Well, what happens is you have to have an extensive case history. So what you would do is get a good case history from either a psychologist or a good psychiatric report, or a social worker might do a social history, and you'd have that based on case observations and informal and formal testing, and you would put that together and try to justify that if you put such a student in a mainstream setting, the situation might get worse, so that he needs to go directly to a therapeutic day school. In some cases that works, in some cases it doesn't,
even if
depending on the situation.
Even if they were never in public school, they still have the right to contact the public school and make this request.
Right, so they would have a multidisciplinary staffing to determine the child's eligibility for the most appropriate intervention, whether that most appropriate intervention is less restrictive, that is to stay within the public school, or more restrictive, that is to stay in a therapeutic day school setting, would depend on the particular merits of the case.
So a parent could say, my child never went to public school, they go and approach, they go through the tuitioning, the multidisciplinary staffing, and so on, and they say, look, we'll place you in a self-contained class in the public school. The parent could say, look, we don't want that, and just go off and hire a private, homeschooling, or try and find a Jewish day school that would take them, right? They're not required to take the recommendation of the public school, isn't that right?
Right.
They still have their own rights to choose what they want.
Well, depending on the determination of the multidisciplinary staffing, then the parent could always go due process if they felt that the situation wasn't being addressed in the most equitable manner. Mm-hmm. But they have the right to address those issues. Can
you give us some examples from climbing Jacob's Ladder that would help a viewer out here who says, I've got a kid that's a problem child. What can I do about them? Tell me some of the things that you talk about in the book that would help a parent that might have some specific problems with their children. If you could bring us some stories and situations and such from the book.
Well, what we try to do in the book is deal with situations on a one-to-one basis. But in dealing with the students on a one-to-one basis, what we've done is realize that there are 4 different subtypes of students who have conflicted religious feelings. Like the first subtype of student represents the student who may feel guilty or conflicted about divided loyalties, whether they should be loyal to themselves and their own principles or loyal to their religion. The second subtype represents the student who feels insecure and often feels unacceptable because they don't feel they have the ability to meet their religious obligations. The third subtype of student represents the oppositional child, who's defiant with respect to religious authority, and they may project a hostile or intimidating manner. And oftentimes this hostile image conceals their fear that any sign of weakness that they might show would leave them vulnerable to mistreatment. And then the fourth type represents students who are demoralized and they're self-punishing, self-abusive, because they're convinced that they're a failure in order to meet their religious obligations. So depending on the subtype into which the student falls, then the book describes different counseling interventions for each type of child. And different counseling interventions are described from the most restrictive intervention to the least restrictive. For example, students at the lowest end of the continuum who are very defensive with respect to confronting their conflicted religious feelings might develop a more supportive approach. We might have the teachers and the counselors and the people that work with them be very supportive and non-confrontational. And when a student's defenses are weakened and they move to the higher end of the counseling spectrum, we might be more likely to use interpretation and confrontation in terms of helping them understand their conflicted religious feelings.
Mm-hmm. So knowing the student and how they would react would often help you dictate what the reaction to take with them when you counsel them would be.
Right. So assessment is a very integral part of the process. So we would try to figure out what are the personal dynamics of this individual child, educational, psychological, and religious, and try to put those dynamics together into one organized system, and then develop intervention techniques that are germane to that particular case.
Very interesting. So I guess that this could go beyond religious conflict. This could be conflicts in many ways. Not that this book focuses on those feelings, but I'm sure that when someone has these problems, there could be a number of conflicts in their lives that would also fall into different categories and be treated in a counseling manner with different approaches depending on the child's reaction to his own particular problem. Not just religious problems themselves, but they could be problems with relationships between siblings, problems with relationships between parents, problems with their social setting or within the environment that they're in. Is that right?
Right. They might have a number of different problems: psychological, educational, medical, family problems. And the religious problem is an important factor. It's not the only factor, but we try to put the religious factor into the mix because it is such an integral part of their lives. But as you point out, there's a number of different issues to address, and it changes depending on the student.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that children in general who have behavior and emotional problems, would you say that 50% are genetic and 50% are I'm just pulling these numbers out of the air, obviously. 50% are because of dysfunctional families at home and the way they were raised. What do you think, even if you don't give me a number, I'm not asking for a number really, how do you think that these problems develop in seemingly normal kids, and then boom, you find these problems when they get older?
It changes for each individual. I don't think you really, at least I don't know if you can actually quantify what percentage it might be, but for each case it changes. For each case it changes. In some cases there are genetic problems that set a predisposition. Now whether those genetic issues are going to manifest themselves depends on the child's environment. In certain cases you might have a disposition towards a particular personality, and the disposition isn't manifested because the parents are able to overcome it through a very warm, nurturing style of parenting. On the other hand, it could be that those dispositions are manifested because of difficulties at the home. So it just depends on the situation. And in some cases, and the book points this out, that there's an interaction between parent and child. Certain parents tend to get along better with certain kinds of children, and certain children tend to get along with certain kinds of parents. So you can have a parent that might be particularly appropriate with a given child's personality, but another child's personality, they don't seem to function as well. So it would be important to try to match a child's personality with a particular parenting style, and that's why it's so important for parents to adjust their parenting style depending on the particular needs of a child instead of having it predetermined. Which
is what this book is all about in some cases, because really if a parent would see a parent of an Orthodox child, which we focus on here, would see that they're having these conflicts with their children, adjusting to the way that you talk about the counseling methods and so on would probably be the first step, wouldn't it?
Right. And in fact, there is a chapter in the book that talks about the stages that parents go through in working with these students, and that they go through definite stages, and that the counselor in working with the parents may adopt certain techniques depending on the stage at which the parent is. So the book specifies those stages that parents go through, and the staff, in terms of the staff that works at the Therapeutic Day School, that the staff go through certain stages professionally, and that different techniques are indicated depending on the stage at which they find themselves.
Let me ask you this, and this is a tough one. What happens when everything you're doing is right to help the child in school, and you're making progress? You're not seeing a kid turn around and be what they should be, but you see the progress going on, and the parents are not cooperating. You just don't see the parental involvement, the adjusting of styles. They didn't read your book. What do you do? How do you help the child when your hands are tied by the parents?
Well, it's a good question, but I think I think the same attitude that you have with the students, you have to adopt with the parents. Parents that are tying you up, so to speak, may have their own resistances, and it's important to help them deal with those resistances. And if you deal with their resistance in a developmental, slow, deliberate manner, you're more likely to find their strengths. So it's a matter of attitude, and to try to approach the parents in a way that you can find their strengths and then exploit those strengths in whatever way you can and have realistic expectations. But I think if the attitude is that they do have strengths, but it might be difficult for them for whatever reason to exhibit those strengths right now, that would be a more helpful attitude than to consider them not working partners.
Very interesting. I just want to once again thank you for being on the show, Dr. Henry Roth.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I wish you much success with your first book, Climbing Jacob's Ladder, Teaching and Counseling Orthodox Students. Henry Roth, Ph.D., the author. And I think that people in the Orthodox community watching the show, especially who know children who might have behavioral and emotional problems, will certainly find the book most educational and interesting. And I think people outside of the Orthodox community will find it most interesting because it's such an interesting subject. Thank you again for being on the show. I want to thank all of you for being with us. We hope you'll be with us next week. Remember, we're on every week at this time. See you next time here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
ויצא וישלח וישב ויקץ ויגש ויחיה שמוס וירבו בשלח ישראל משפטים תרומה תצווה כיסיסו ויעקב בגרדי ויקרצה שמיני תזריע מתורה אחרי מוס כדושים אמור בהר וחוקוס היי במדבר נסו והלוס שלח קורח חוגס בו פנחס מטוס מזה דברים וסחנני גברי שופטים כיסי כיסבונים סבים ויחזין לזוס הברכה These are the 5 חומשים, the 5 ספרים בראשית שמות ויקרא במדבר דברים